From Software has been all over the map when it comes to the genres that it's dipped its toes into throughout its existence. They mostly tend to revolve around being action games. True, but they've also delved into other areas, different shades of action that make their games stand out from the crowd. Before we begin, please consider subscribing and enabling all notifications by clicking the bell icon. With that out of the way, let's get started. Bloodborne certainly does this in a number of ways, one of which is that the game is arguably more of a horror game in a sense than anything else the studio has ever done, and a damn good one at that. Now, when you think of horror games, your mind is more likely to immediately drift to the likes of Resident Evil or Silent Hill before Bloodborne, and there's plenty of good reason for that. But if you think about what makes those horror games so effective, limited resources, high-stakes combat, horrifying enemies, a mysterious setting, etc., you pretty quickly see that Bloodborne has all of these things in spades. In fact, you could argue that Bloodborne has more of these elements than many other games that are more conventionally described as horror. Whether or not you play Bloodborne for its horror elements is up to you, but those elements are there, and there's no reason why people who enjoy horror games shouldn't give Bloodborne a try. It is an action game first and foremost, and a tough one at that, with lots of RPG elements to manage as well. But if those things don't necessarily scare you off as a fan of more typical horror games, then there are a lot of good reasons why Bloodborne might just be a very logical choice for you to try out. Before you're able to sink your teeth into anything else about Bloodborne, you'll notice its setting. It's a fictional city, but based on very real characteristics of the Victorian and medieval eras of our world, with a little gothic horror thrown in on the aesthetics. It all mixes together extremely well and makes the world immediately believable and harrowing to experience. The streets, buildings, fences, and just about every other physical item you come across is drenched in the underlying characteristics of this fictional world. No matter where you go, it's always dark and usually feels like it just got finished raining. All of this is compounded with the designs of the various enemies, from more typical humanoid zombie-type characters all the way to beasts that just defy description and have to be seen to be believed. Bloodborne has it all when it comes to creature design. Despite the variety of different enemies that you do come across throughout the game, they all seem to fit with the game's central theme of desperate people looking to cure themselves of various ailments being mutated into ghastly monsters. Which leads us to the story and the setting of the game, which is every bit of something that you would expect to see in a classic horror game. An isolated, mysterious city that uses a dogmatic devotion to blood ministry as some sort of blanket solution for all human ailment. What's worse, as you might expect, this style of medical treatment has gone horribly awry and turned the entire population into flesh-hungry beasts, none of which are looking to have a constructive conversation to settle their differences with you. The setting of Bloodborne is one of the most terrifying and hopeless stories of any video game I've played in recent years. It's an extremely dismal situation with very little chance of getting any better, and that's exactly what you want out of a horror game, because it can create a strong sense of tension that, if handled correctly, can last the entire game. Bloodborne's various locations all contain images of intense despair, human experimentation, and just general macabre of all sorts. Many horror games today tend to not hit these points quite so directly on the nose. But Bloodborne is having none of that, as it drenches the player in disturbing imagery from beginning to end. The effectiveness of these themes is multiplied many times over by the game's densely packed and, at times, totally irrational Gothic architecture that keeps your mind guessing about where you are and where you're headed. The music is also something to behold. While the big orchestral sound is generally used for more epic adventures, it's used in Bloodborne to great effect, despite the style being totally different than those games. A constant sense of tension is established with the moody strings and unexpected chord progressions that might ease off a bit from time to time, but never really totally lets up. It only fades away a bit at certain times to create contrast between more somber moments and the big booming melodies that accompany Bloodborne's many terrifying boss battles. Bloodborne's combat is its bread and butter though, and it will ultimately be the most predominant element in your mind for much of the game. If you've ever played a Souls game, then you should generally know what to expect. The combat here is far more ferocious and unyielding than Dark Souls or Demon Souls. It regularly rewards the player for aggression instead of defensiveness, but it also punishes you for not knowing when to say when. Moments that require you to back off are rarer than a Souls fan might expect, but that doesn't make them any less important to recognize. Enemies in Bloodborne are relentlessly deadly no matter how good you get. You can always slip up and get taken out by a so-called weak enemy if you're not paying attention to what you're doing. This is true of all great horror games. In fact, where many other horror games slip up with this by giving you lots of ammunition and overpowered characteristics by the end of them, Bloodborne keeps things simple by giving you a lot of options in terms of weapons, but no one silver bullet that ever makes you feel like you're undefeatable. You can definitely choose weapons and styles that fit your playstyle that will get you through many situations, but no matter what you choose and no matter how good you become, you're always required to be at your best. If you fail to be at your best, you're at great risk of dying. Some enemies are massive and intimidating, and some are smaller and meek-looking, but none of them are incapable of taking you out at any stage of your progression. And that is the true essence of what it means to be a horror game. Always maintaining that fragile sense of urgency and tension, and never really letting you feel like you're totally on top of the situation. At least, not with your first playthrough anyway. Bloodborne is a great game, unlike most, that blends ideas from different genres in a way that feels totally natural and not forced at all. Action games, RPGs, and horror games all have lended many of their best ideas to Bloodborne, and it ended up being an experiment worth doing, as it became one of the best games of the last generation and a defining game for the PlayStation 4. A lot of other games that try to blend ideas from different genres like this would end up falling short in one or two areas in order to make the larger vision of the game work, but not Bloodborne. It compromises in basically no area while excelling in basically all of them, making it an excellent action RPG and an amazing horror game at the same time. If you're a fan of any of these genres, or just looking for something a little different and challenging to throw into your library, you could do a whole lot worse than Bloodborne. And that brings us to the end of the video. A quick request, we upload new videos every single day, and if you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing. It really helps us out. Also, don't forget to enable all notifications by clicking the bell icon so that you can receive daily video updates. Thanks for watching.